There was a man who wanted to marry her, a widowed prime minister, brilliant, prominent, one of the most consequential figures in British public life. And by the accounts that have come down to us, she wanted to marry him too. Her mother said no. That was it. No scandal, no dramatic rupture. Just a quiet, firm refusal from a woman who had decided, somewhere along the way, that her daughter belonged to her. And that was the end of it. The princess's name was Victoria. Her family called her Toria, and in the absence of a wedding that never came, she did something that tells you everything about the life she was living. She went to Cartier, not for a bridal suite, not because a husband had chosen something for her. She went because her parents were about to be crowned, and she needed something to wear, something of her own. The delicate floral diamond tiara she acquired, nestled into her characteristically abundant hair in the photographs that survive, is the single piece of jewelry historians can point to with any confidence and say, that was hers. Not borrowed. Not inherited from a wedding that never happened. Just hers. A king's daughter, present at the centre of the British royal family for 67 years, and almost nothing in the end to show for it. How does that happen? The lively girl at Marlborough House. To understand what was lost, you have to begin with what she was. Victoria Alexandra Olga Mary was born on the 6th of July, 1868, at Marlborough House, the fourth child and second daughter of Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, and his wife Alexandra of Denmark. She was christened with a roster of royal godparents that reads like a map of European monarchy: Queen Victoria herself, Emperor Alexander II of Russia, Queen Olga of Greece, and several German and Danish relatives. The world, it seemed, was paying attention from the very first day. And the child who grew up inside that world was, by all accounts, genuinely alive in it. The Wales children were raised between Marlborough House and Sandringham in an atmosphere that Queen Victoria herself sometimes criticised as too boisterous, too informal, too full of noise and laughter for royal children. She was not entirely wrong. The household was warm, chaotic, and deeply affectionate, and Toria thrived in it. She was musical, she was mischievous, she had what later accounts describe as a lively, sharp personality, the kind of person who notices everything and says rather more than is strictly advisable. She rode, she cycled, she danced. She developed a love of bookbinding, of photography, of horticulture. She was, in the language of her era, accomplished, and in any language she was bright. Her siblings were Albert Victor, the eldest son, George, the future king, Louise, the eldest daughter, and Maud, the youngest. They were a close, noisy, affectionate group, raised in the kind of informal warmth that their grandmother found slightly alarming. This matters, because the story of Princess Victoria is not the story of a woman who was passive or dull or content to fade. It is the story of what happens when a vivid person is slowly, quietly placed in a box, and the box is lined with love, which makes it almost impossible to name as a cage at all. Mother dear. The woman who built that cage was also the woman Toria adored. Queen Alexandra, or Mother dear, as she insisted her children call her, was one of the most beautiful women of her age and one of the most possessive mothers in royal history. She had, according to multiple accounts drawn from the period, a dream: to live always with her three girls around her, not to see them married and gone, not to wave them off to foreign courts or English country houses, to keep them. Contemporary observers noted it. Victoria, Empress Frederick of Germany, Queen Victoria's eldest daughter, wrote to Alexandra in the 1890s, urging her to find husbands for her unmarried daughters, warning that delaying their marriages really is not wise. The letter exists in the historical record. Alexandra's response, in practical terms, was to allow Maud to marry and Louise to marry, and to keep Toria. Alexandra's world was jewels. This is not a small thing to say about a woman of her era and position. She was famous across Europe for the way she wore them. Layers of pearls stacked high against her throat, diamond necklaces cascading below, the whole effect somewhere between armor and spectacle. The chokers she favored, those tight, high collars of pearls, were worn, it was said, to conceal a small scar on her neck from a childhood illness or surgery. A private vulnerability transformed into a public signature so influential that society women from London to St. Petersburg copied it. Her most significant piece was the Dagmar necklace, a lavish Neo-Byzantine pearl and diamond creation, its heart a replica of the medieval Dagmar cross, presented to her as a wedding gift in 1863 by King Frederick VII of Denmark. Alexandra wore it draped across her bodice at the most important moments of her life, including her own coronation. It is now part of the royal collection. This was the world Toria grew up inside, a mother roped in pearls, glittering at the center of every room, and beside her, a daughter in simpler strands, plainer settings, present, always present, but never quite the subject of the portrait. The contrast was not accidental, it was structural, and it would only deepen. The suitor who got away. By the mid-1890s there was a man. Archibald Primrose, the 5th Earl of Rosebery, was one of the most prominent figures in British public life. A widower since 1890, a former Prime Minister who had served from 1894 to 1895, a man of considerable intelligence and political weight. He was, by multiple accounts drawn from later biographical sources and royal history writing, the most seriously discussed suitor in Victoria's life. Royal Central, drawing on biographical material, describes him as the most talked about suitor for Toria, a man whose marriage to her would have given her a genuinely engaged, politically active life as a statesman's wife. The story, as it has come down to us through family memoir and court reminiscence, is that Rosebery asked for Victoria's hand, that both parties would have welcomed the match, and that Alexandra refused, preferring to keep her daughter by her side. There is a line attributed to Victoria in her later years, reported in secondary sources as something she said to a companion, that she and Rosebery could have been so happy. It is worth pausing on that phrase because it is not a document. It is a recollection transmitted through later writers, and it cannot be verified in any primary source currently available. The Henry Poole biographical essay presents it as something told to a companion in later life. It has been repeated consistently enough across reputable accounts that it carries the weight of family memory, but it is memory, not record, and it deserves to be held as such. What it describes, if true, is not a grand romantic tragedy in the operatic sense. It is something quieter and more devastating. A woman who could see quite clearly the life she might have had. As a statesman's wife, engaged with the world, raising a family, and who was prevented from reaching it not by scandal or circumstance, but by her mother's love. Rosebery eventually faded from the picture. He never remarried. Victoria never married at all. Other names appear in the historical record: Prince Adolphus of Teck, a court equerry named Sir Arthur Davidson. But the evidence for any serious negotiation in those cases is thin, resting largely on retrospective speculation rather than documented proposals or formal correspondence. What the record does support is the broader pattern, that potential matches were quietly discouraged, one by one, until the possibility of marriage simply ceased to present itself. Alexandra's possessiveness was not malicious. That is perhaps the most painful part. She genuinely believed she was keeping her daughter close out of love. Victoria, for her part, appears to have genuinely loved her mother in return. The cage was real, the love was also real, and the two things coexisted for decades without resolution. The sisters who escaped. Louise married in 1889. Alexander Duff, Earl of Fife, not a royal but a peer, and Queen Victoria created a dukedom for him so that her granddaughter might have a title worthy of her birth. Louise became a duchess, she had a trousseau, she had bridal jewels, she had a household of her own. Maud married in 1896, Prince Carl of Denmark, her first cousin. And then, in 1905, Norway dissolved its union with Sweden and chose Carl as its king. He took the name Haakon VII. Maud, the youngest Wales daughter, the one who had seemed the least likely candidate for a crown, became the first queen of a newly independent Norway. She had a trousseau, she had bridal jewels, she had a country. Victoria stayed. The dual contrast here does not need to be overstated to be felt. When a royal woman married in this era, she received a suite, pieces chosen or commissioned to mark the beginning of her own story, her own household, her own identity as something other than a daughter. Louise had hers, Maud had hers. The wedding gifts that poured in for each of them were displayed, admired, catalogued. Victoria received no such suite, because there was no wedding, because there was no occasion that called for one. What she had instead was proximity to her mother's collection, pieces borrowed for specific events, worn and returned, never quite belonging to her in the way that a bride's jewels belong to a bride. Many of the necklaces and brooches she wore in formal portraits likely belonged to Queen Alexandra and were part of the larger pool of family jewellery which the older woman controlled and from which she loaned pieces as needed. The Cartier tiara she acquired around 1902 stands almost alone in the record as something she chose for herself. Something that was genuinely hers. Almost alone. That word carries a great deal of weight. The glorified maid. By the mid-1890s, with Maud married and Louise established with her Fife family, Victoria had become, in practical terms, her mother's full-time companion. Grand Duchess Olga Alexandrovna of Russia, Alexandra's niece, is quoted in multiple reputable secondary sources as having said that Queen Alexandra treated Victoria as little more than a glorified maid. The phrase has been repeated so consistently across biographical literature that it has become the shorthand for this period of Toria's life. It should be noted that it reaches us through later authors quoting Olga's recollections rather than from a primary document. But its alignment with everything else we know about the dynamic makes it, at minimum, a credible characterization. The daily rhythm of those years was domestic, constrained, and increasingly difficult. Victoria accompanied her mother everywhere. She filled her time with music, bookbinding, photography, gardening, charitable work in the village. She was, by later accounts, often unwell, prone to neuralgia, migraines, depression. Christopher Hibbert's biography of Edward VII describes her as becoming increasingly resentful, apt to make sharp comments about relatives she found dull. Her nephew, the future Duke of Windsor, described her in terms that are considerably less charitable. A line that has been quoted in reputable secondary sources and that reflects, at minimum, how at least one younger family member experienced her temper. It is worth noting that the Duke of Windsor was not known for generosity toward older female relatives. What the sharper tongue and the hypochondria actually represent when you look at the whole arc of her life is the cost of the cage. A woman of genuine intelligence and warmth with no outlet for either, in a role that asked everything of her and gave her almost nothing in return. She once told a neighbour in her later years at Coppins, "I was the daughter of a king, but now I am a child of God." It is the kind of statement that arrives after a very long journey. It suggests someone who had, eventually, found a frame for her life that did not depend on the world's recognition of her worth. But that came later. For now, there were still decades of Marlborough House, of Sandringham, of being the daughter who stayed. "Hello, you old fool." And yet, there is a story, repeated in multiple biographical accounts, rooted in household reminiscence, that in their later years, Victoria and her brother George V spoke on the telephone every single day. And that on one occasion, she picked up the receiver before the operator had properly connected the call and greeted him with, "Hello, you old fool." A servant was listening. The story has the texture of something that actually happened, the kind of detail that survives precisely because it is too specific and too human to have been invented. It tells you something essential about what existed between them, a friendship so old and so comfortable that it had long since dispensed with ceremony. George V, who was not a demonstratively emotional man, was by all accounts deeply attached to his sister. They had grown up together in that boisterous Marlborough House household. They had watched their siblings marry and leave. They had both, in their different ways, been shaped by the same parents, the same world, the same expectations. He relied on her, she confided in him. And in a life that had been defined by what she could not have, this relationship, daily, warm, irreverent, was something real and sustaining. It is the relief in the arc of her story, the place where the audience can breathe. Coppins. Queen Alexandra died on the 20th of November 1925. Victoria was 57 years old. For the first time in her adult life, she was not someone's companion. She was not needed in the way she had always been needed. She was, for the first time, simply herself. She purchased Coppins, a country house at Iver in Buckinghamshire, not far from Windsor. She settled into it with what sounds, in the accounts that survive, like genuine relief. She gardened. She made music with professional musicians she invited to the house. She became an honorary president of the local horticultural society. She engaged with village life. She turned increasingly toward religion. It was a late freedom, and a partial one. But it was hers. The Cartier tiara, meanwhile, had quietly disappeared from the record. There are no photographs of her wearing it at Coppins. There is no documented appearance of it after the early years of the century. Whether it was sold, stored, or simply set aside is not known. The piece that had been her one significant personal acquisition had, like so much else in her life, retreated from view. When she died at Coppins in the early hours of the 3rd of December, 1935, she left the house to her nephew, Prince George, Duke of Kent. It became home to the Duke, his wife, Princess Marina, and their children, and remained in Kent family hands until it was sold in the early 1970s. Her will, like all British royal wills, remains sealed. There is no published list of the jewels she owned at her death. No piece can be authoritatively identified as hers on the basis of probate or archival evidence. The jewel box, to the extent that we can see into it at all, is nearly empty. George V noted her death in his diary. No one ever had a sister like her. It is a simple sentence. It does not reach for grandeur. It does not perform grief. It is the kind of thing a man writes when he is not writing for posterity, when he is writing because he has lost something irreplaceable, and the only honest response is to say so plainly. He died on the 20th of January, 1936, 7 weeks after she did. Whether the proximity of those two deaths is coincidence or something more is a question that biographers have noted without resolving. What is certain is that they had spoken every day, that she had been for decades the person who knew him best, and that within 7 weeks of losing her, he was gone too. Victoria of Wales was buried at the Royal Burial Ground at Frogmore on the 8th of January 1936, reinterred there after an initial service at St George's Chapel, Windsor. She was 67 years old. History has not been particularly interested in her since, and perhaps that is the final thing her story asks us to sit with. Not the injustice of it, though the injustice is real, but the specific shape of the absence, A woman who was present at everything, essential to the people who loved her, who gave 67 years of her life to a family and a role that documented almost nothing of what she actually was. Her will is sealed. Her jewels are unidentified. The Cartier tiara she chose for herself around 1902, the one piece the record can point to with any confidence, has not been seen in over a century. And Rosebery, he never remarried either. He outlived the moment and the possibility and eventually the century that had contained them both. We could have been so happy. We cannot verify those words, but we cannot quite set them down either. No one ever had a sister like her. 7 weeks. If Toria's story stayed with you, I'd be grateful for a like. It's a small thing that genuinely helps this channel find the people who care about women history walked past without stopping. And if you want to be here when we open the next door, please subscribe. There are always more.